Womack's video that he put out yesterday? Anybody see this? Stu, you can bring this up if you'd like and show our listeners. If there is one player going into next season that I am most excited about, there's players on the board that I already know that I'm excited about. Garrett Nussmeier, very excited for the opportunity to watch Nussmeier finally be kind of like unhinged as a quarterback. Nobody over his shoulder.
Unencumbered.
Right, like nobody's going to like snipe his job if he has a bad series. Like he's the guy. Like you're almost kind of like living and winning off of his right arm. So excited to see what Garrett Nussmeier is going to do. Kyron Lacey being a top target in the SEC, I think he's ready for this moment. Kind of excited to see him step into that role, right, and be that player for LSU. And even a guy like Harold Perkins on the defensive side of the ball with a new defensive coordinator, a guy in Blake Baker who has recruited him, really kind of sought after him, and now has a chance to coach him in what would seem like kind of his prime season at LSU. Third year, knows everything, been around the SECs, made plays. This guy's, kind of matured into his best version of a college football player physically, and now Baker has a chance to coach him. Would be Harold Perkins. Very excited to see what Perkins looks like in year 3. And there's some other guys. In fact, if you want to jump inside of the chat and put the name that may jump out to you of who excites you most going into the season, we'd love to hear from you inside the chat right now. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can dial it in.
Probably can't play the audio from.
That's fine. Can you maneuver that where we don't have the audio? If you want, you can just play it. But if there's one player that you don't know much about that I am so excited to see become an every down player, it's got to be Deshawn Wack. I mean, remember how hard it was for him to get on the field even after he made that play?
Change his number because he could be on special teams and then would change it back to play defense, and you only saw 92, not 16.
And now you've made it through the portal window. Portal closed last night. If there was one player like in last year's end of the year where you thought like, hey man, make sure at all costs you protect number 16, you protect Womack. Now he's gone through spring. He's safe. He's in the program. He's going to go through the offseason. This cat is going to be an animal. Like he's going to be a game wrecker, in my opinion. For him to be able to now play every down, have a guy like Bo Davis, Blake Baker, Kevin Peoples, Olsen, all these guys that are like now attentive and are playing him and understand. I mean, you talk to some people around LSU that have like been around this defense and seen some of the players. I mean, there's some people that have talked to like Baker and Peoples and Davis, and they're like, how are they this bad? I mean, like, I get it. You were inexperienced and you didn't have some players at some key positions like defensive back, which can expose a defense, especially in the SEC when you have quarterbacks like the conference did last season. But for LSU to roll out a defense that featured the names that it did. I mean, both Jordan Jefferson and Mason Smith come off the board the first 4 rounds of the draft.
Yeah.
I mean, it's by that metric alone, you got a couple of pros. Mekhi Wingo's a pro. It's like, how are you this historically bad? And then you've got a guy on like Womack that's sitting on the sidelines. I mean, I've talked to more people up there. Like, how did this guy burn a red shirt yet
didn't play?
Like, it's like, how does that happen?
He's on special teams every game.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm talking about like, you see the Arkansas game. You see the play he makes against Grambling early on special teams. You look at the defense and you're like, fellas, you can't stop anybody. And this cat is just sitting here.
Gets
I didn't pick up a smoothie on time. Who cares? Like, who cares? Who cares?
And on time enough to play special teams.
Yeah, I mean, like, you can't tackle anybody, and this guy is going to be a killer. I'm so fired up to watch Deshawn Wack be an every down player for LSU going into next season and just kind of let him fly, let him get out there. And moreover, to that point, this LSU team putting the best players in the right spots to succeed, right? Like playing the best players. I mean, that's one thing. Like we weren't crazy. You know what I mean? Like you talk to people around the program, they're like, I mean, how did this guy not play? Like I was screaming it into a microphone. Like people were like, Culotta's going to have an aneurysm on his show. I mean, like his face is beat red. But it was like, what am I missing? How does Deshawn Wack not play? Like, where is he? You can't stop anybody, and he's just watching?
And clearly, the NFL thought differently of LSU's defensive line than LSU thought of LSU's defensive line when you have 3 guys get drafted on a historically bad defense, and you still have 3 guys that are going to go to the league, whether it be Mason Smith, Jordan Jefferson, Mekhi Wingo. Like, you would think that LSU would have had nobody drafted with how bad your defensive line was or how bad your defense was in general. But clearly, the NFL saw something that maybe that's why you had to make a wholesale change from the coaching staff, because they had talent. And then when you have, in the case of Deshawn Wack, somebody that when he played, it's not like he didn't produce. He plays 1 snap against Arkansas, gets a sack. He plays 1 snap against Texas A&M, gets a sack. Plays against Wisconsin, wins the game. And it's well, I guess we ran out of time. But I do believe that this is, as Brian Kelly has said multiple times, that I believe the light bulb has come on, or that he has learned the position now and he's now ready. But it did feel like somebody that was, whenever he was playing and your defense was so bad, that he could make an impact and help you. And it didn't really matter as to why he wasn't playing, but people were looking for answers. And when you had somebody as skilled as Wack was and he doesn't see the field, that's why people were frustrated.
Matthew Vincent, Ashton Stamps is his guy. Stewie was very high on Stamps in spring. Seems like a guy that has secured his spot as a DB and a starting corner for LSU going into next season. KC says Whit Weeks is a guy that he's anxious to see coming up next season. I think Weeks is going to be a guy that really takes that next step, feels like. I mean, he was another one.
Yeah.
You know, where you're like, I mean, they played him for 3 weeks in October, and he was the leading tackler all 3 games, and then he is just MIA in November.
You could have...
he's gone.
You could have took somebody that didn't watch football, like a casual football fan, and said, put on an LSU tape.
Yeah, right. Don't know anything.
Watch number 1.
Don't know anything.
And watch number 40. Which one's better? And probably 10 out of 10 people would have told you number 40 is the better player.
He's the starter, right?
Easily. Why doesn't he play?
I
don't know.
I could go even one further. I could go Braden Swinson.
Yeah.
Was a guy that every single time he was on the field,
Pressure.
He made a play. Ovia Gofu was big, strong, looked the part, but when the play got in front of him, 5 out of 10 times he'd make it. 1 out of 2 times he'd make it. It seemed like Swinson would make the play every time. But yet, you go to the next week, and a Gofu's the starter.
I mean,
it's like, what film did you watch? Like, what is it? What is the deal? Why can't the better player play? No disrespect to Ogofu. Good football player. Had a good career. When it came down to his time at LSU, he had a better player behind him, but for whatever reason, they didn't play him. They didn't play him. Man, I'm kind of like falling back in it.
Well, no, but that's what should honestly make you more optimistic for the upcoming year, because I don't think that's going to happen again. I don't know if Matt House just didn't have a pulse of the locker room and of the team, which somebody in the chat was talking about Jacques' video. Like, thank God that got out, because you might have been running it back with Matt House. Which
I think they would have.
I think they would have. I know we catch a lot of shit for that.
JD, man of the people.
That's what I'm saying, doing the Lord's work.
I think so. I think they would have.
But when you have the amount of changes that you had on the defensive side of the football, how could you not be a little bit optimistic as to what it's going to look like? You talk about players that people want to see. It's hard. I'm hard pressed not to say Perkins, just because of the position change again, where you don't want to waste him, but you also want him to reach some potential of like, can he be otherworldly and be the star that you want him to be, or is he just the one trick pony that you have to rush off the outside because he can't play the inside? You just don't want to see him get kind of caught in no man's land like you did last year. You want him to be the best player in the country on defense.
It's hard to do what LSU football did to Harold Perkins in his second year. I'm telling you, it is difficult to take a player.
The numbers were still good.
The cream's going to rise to the top.
Right.
I mean, the elite is always going to find its way to the top of the mountain. And Harold Perkins, no matter what system or scheme you put him in, no matter what position on the field you put him in, he's just too talented. He's just too good. I mean, he's always going to find the ball. He's always going to be around it. He's always going to make plays. He had no business running down the middle of the field, backpedaling and flipping his hips against Missouri. But, I mean, he can do it. He can do it. He made the play. It's the best play on the ball LSU made all season long. I mean,
that or Greg Penn's interception against Texas A&M.
Maybe.
Those two.
Maybe.
And that's how...
but I mean,
you were on defense when you can remember them.
Yeah, I mean, but what I'm saying is it doesn't matter what scheme you put him in. Like, he's going to be the best player on LSU's defense. LSU's defense was historically bad. He was still the best player on it, right? He was just out of position. They didn't have him in the right scheme. They didn't have him doing the right stuff. And you would think with Baker, Peoples, Olsen, Davis, these guys that are like, hey, man, forget all these dumb politics or whatever they were playing before this. Let's just play the best players in the right spots and make this defense good. You know what I mean? Screw everything else. Okay, this is where you need to put Perkins, and this is how you got to play him. And once he's in a comfortable position where he can do what he does best, run, tackle, play on the ball, things that you're like, man, not everybody can do all this.
Running back.
Right? That to me is the part that's so frustrating about Perkins last season and so hopeful about this season is if you're a football coach, I mean, Bo Davis has been doing this now, nearly 30 years, right? I mean, Blake Baker's still relatively fresh at it, but I mean, still he's been in the game for over a decade and, has no sign of showing that he's got any end in sight. Once every 10 years, you get a guy like Perkins in the game, right? I mean, you go talk to John Chavis. He coached Eric Berry and Tyrann Mathieu. Yeah. Outside of that, everybody was kind of the same. You know what I mean? You hear Chavis talk, you hear Chief talk. He always references Berry and Mathieu, right? It's those guys are just a little bit different than everybody else. He coached for nearly 50 years, right? You don't get those guys every single year. So when Harold Perkins shows up, you're as a football coach, you got to be oh my goodness, fellas, all that stuff we've been doing every year in, year out, where you got to play this guy who can only do this at this position. Hell, we got a guy that can do 3 positions now. He can play nickel, he can play linebacker, he can play safety. I mean, where you want him?
Running back.
Put him at running back.
But wherever it is, it's hey, don't waste him.
Yeah.
I mean, you only get 3 years of him.
And now you're on your 3rd year.
You're not getting any pass rush. I'm going to put him at nickel.
Yeah, let him go cover the slot against Missouri.
He's your best pass rusher. Or he can cover
He's
2.
undersized.
Right.
I mean, just
he can cover
fellas,
2.
It's hard.
It is.
It's difficult as a football coach to get dropped off Harold Perkins and misplay him. It'd be like somebody being hey, you're in podcasting? Yeah. Here's the Joe Rogan show. Here's the Pat McAfee show. And then you get on and talk Hollywood gossip. You're buddy, you got the biggest platform in the world. You got access to any guest you want. What are you doing? You're well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you've been in podcasting for 10 years now. What do you mean you don't know?
We have Bill
Like,
Belichick and Nick Saban
here's
on
Harold
line one.
Perkins. Like, what do you make him great? You know, like, I mean, like, you're welcome. You know what I mean? Like, don't send him back and say, I don't know what to do with him. That's what kind of last year felt like. I just think this year, I'm with you. I mean, you know, like, how fun was Matthew in 11?
Right.
Right? Where you were like, yeah, I mean, you don't know where he's going to line up. And wherever he does line up, he's going to wreck this game. He's going to come off the edge. He's going to guard your tight end. He's going to guard your wide receiver. He's going to blitz. He's going to return the punt. I mean, like,
he's everywhere and nowhere.
We have him and you don't.
Yeah,
You know
and we're
what I
going to
mean?
use the shit out of him.
We're gonna maximize him to win the game. Don't let him sit on the sidelines on third down. I mean, like, what are you doing? That is mesmerizing.
And that's where I think that I guess the conversation is like almost it's circled around Harold Perkins of, I know he's not exactly Tyrann Mathieu, but you want to see him just kind of be everywhere. You don't want to see him pigeonholed to just the middle if that's what they're going to do. I would like to see him be able to be a football player. Like, use the instincts that he has and use the God-given ability he has to go. Maybe we coach 10, and we got one out there that you can go do whatever you like. And that there's the stories that come out about Tyrann Mathieu. He did not play within the construct of the defense.
He wasn't supposed to.
Exactly. It was go.
Yeah, right.
Go do whatever.
It was like, hey, fellas, we got this dude that
you can't coach
nobody else has, and I've never seen but one time in my coaching career.
And he ain't scared of horses.
This is, I mean, like, use him differently. That was the thing about him his freshman year that was so baffling about his sophomore season was that they took his skill set and they maximized it for that year. It was like, well, he doesn't know the scheme all that well, but he does know how to run and get off the edge and tackle. It's like, all right, well, look what he just did to Bryce Young. You know, I mean, he just
the Alabama game.
He just stalked and hunted Bryce Young in the red zone. You know, like, let's take that and grow off of it.